Welcome to Abilene People. And I'm so pleased to be downtown Abilene in the office of the Abilene Philharmonic with our guest today, Liberty Grace Bland, the Executive Director of the Abilene Philharmonic. Welcome to Abilene People, Liberty Grace.
Thanks, Danny, for having me. It's
Oh,
an
yeah,
honor to
man.
get to visit with you.
This is fun. This is a lot of fun. Now, you are somebody who is originally, well, I guess you were born in Abilene, but you were raised in Throckmorton, Texas.
Yes.
And now you have come back to Abilene as a young adult to lead one of Abilene's really most prestigious groups, the Abilene Philharmonic. So do you ever sit and think, wow, I always dreamed in Throckmorton of leading a Philharmonic?
You know, growing up in Throckmorton, I really loved it. I had a great experience. Leading a Philharmonic orchestra was never something that I had on my bucket list.
You've been doing that for a year, right?
For a year, yes. I've been back in Abilene for 3 years. And it's been a wonderful journey. But yeah, it was never something that I had envisioned. I always grew up going to the symphony and I loved it, but never saw myself as running one. So it's been a really cool experience.
But you did grow up going to the symphony.
I did, yes.
And you say you loved it. Now, not that that's unusual. There are a lot of young children. I've been to the Philharmonic here at the Convention Center, and you see young children. But at the same time, I would imagine that growing up in West Texas, there's not necessarily a lot of young children that the Philharmonic's number one on the list. How did that come to be for you?
So for me, I grew up on a ranch that was 30 miles out in the country outside of Throckmorton. And when I was growing up, it was during the drought years. And so it was tough, you know, I mean, it's just a hard way of life. And so my mom wanted to bring beauty into that toughness. And so she started taking me to the Fort Worth Symphony Orchestra at Bass Hall, which is just a beautiful building. And I remember the first time she took me, I was probably 9 or 10. And I sat there and I thought to myself, this is the first time I've ever experienced genuine beauty. And I felt like it was like healing to the soul, even as a 10-year-old. Like you think, you know, kids don't think about those things, but like you do. And I think music has the power to transcend all ages, which is what I love about it. And so for me, that was the first time I was like, oh my gosh, this is really healing on the inside. And so my mom got to where she would take me all the time. I mean, we come to the Philharmonic as well. And so it became something that I just really loved. And that's the part that I love about my job the most, is getting to expose other children in the big country to classical music, because I do think it has a lot more power than just the power to entertain.
Well, we'll come back to the beauty of classical music and in your role as executive director of the Philharmonic, but I just have to quickly move past because there's somewhere I really want to get in your CV, your resume, your experience. But you do have a bachelor's degree in political science.
I do, yes.
And you also have MBA, and you went to Tulsa to Oral Roberts for that.
For my MBA, and then ACU for my undergrad.
And then you studied in Jerusalem at Hebrew University. It was a research project, and I want to talk about that for a minute because I think you gained, from previous conversations, what I've learned, some life insights from your time in Jerusalem. So did you enjoy Jerusalem? And I've been there myself. I know people ask, was it dangerous? Did you ever feel at peril? So talk to us about that.
Yeah. I loved living in Jerusalem. It was definitely a very eye-opening experience, though. I feel like it was like nothing that I had imagined it would be. I feel like, you know, when you go visit someplace, you see the best parts of it. But then when you actually live there and you integrate into a neighborhood, you get the opportunity to experience the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it really took the blinders off of me. I felt like, you know, you come from West Texas, born and raised, you have one idea of the world. And I had lived in Europe before, but never the Middle East. And so going there and living in Jerusalem, it was the most eye-opening experience of my life, because I realized we have a lot of stereotypes about people on both sides. And I think it changed my view of humanity a lot, because it made me realize that most people just want to live a good, normal life, and they want to raise their kids, and they want to retire. And it just was eye-opening, because you have this polarized view of like, there's the good and there's the bad, and you're on one side or the other, and you're extreme on either side. But I realized there's so much that unites us, no matter what side of the table you're on. And it really was just eye-opening to me to realize most people are good. But sadly, the ones we hear about oftentimes are the extremists. But at the end of the day, most people just want to live a good, normal life.
And in Jerusalem, you could say it's the headquarters of three major religions. Yeah. There's the Christian Jerusalem, there's the Jewish Jerusalem, and there's the Muslim Jerusalem. Did you experience people from all three of those religions when you were there?
I did. And I was very thankful because I actually was able to have friends from all three, which is wonderful. I feel like a lot of times as an American, you don't realize the privilege that you're able to go to every neighborhood in the city. Whereas, if you're a Jew or if you're a Muslim, you're kind of limited to where you can go within the city. So it was definitely a privilege being able to see all sides of it and befriend people. The main thing I realized is the hospitality. You think, oh, if I'm in this neighborhood, I'm not going to experience this hospitality, or maybe I'll be unsafe. But I did not experience that at all. Obviously, you want to lead, with caution and being safe. But for instance, like one night, I'm a distance runner. And so when I was in Jerusalem, I was making use of all their wonderful hills to train. And I was running, and it was in the evening, but it was nowhere near dark. But a desert storm blew in. And at first I thought, okay, I'm going to be able to make it home. But I was about 3 miles from home at that point, and this huge storm blew in. And so at this point, I had to stop running because I was like, I can't keep going. The dust was blowing so bad. And so I was in an Arab neighborhood at the time, which stereotypes would tell me this is not the place you need to be if you're stuck by yourself as a single female.
And if I could, a single white female, blonde hair, did you feel like you were standing out in the crowd?
Yes, yeah, I was definitely the only international there at that moment. And so I ducked into this corner store, and there was a gentleman that was in his 50s there, and his sons were helping him run his store. And I'm trying to get on my phone to call their version of an Uber. And this driver's responding to me, but he doesn't speak English. And there's all of these taxi cabs around, so I don't know which one it is that I'm on the phone with, and I sure don't want to get in the wrong one. And so this gentleman who owns the store, he comes up to me, and I'm ducked in, to the opening of his store, and he says, you can stay as long as you need to. Because he knew I'm in duress at this point. I have nowhere to go. I'm in my running clothes. And he was like, you can stay as long as you need to. And he hands me dessert, which is their, hospitality aspect. And he hands me dessert, and he's like, we'll help you. You can stay as long as you need to. You're safe here. And so he ends up getting on the phone with my Uber driver. And he gets off the phone with him, and he says, okay, he's going to pull up, and he's going to honk 3 times. So that way you know which one to get into. And so I got into the car, and I got safely home, and I cried on my way home because I was like, stereotypes would tell me that wouldn't happen. Stereotypes would tell me I would be unsafe. But again, it goes back to that aspect of most people are kind, and most people love their families. This gentleman is there with his sons working his store on a normal day, and here comes this little 20-something-year-old American who needs help, and he was so quick and gracious to help me. And I think my worldview changed at that point.
Isn't it interesting? That's a formative story. That's a formative experience. And I'm sure you never saw the guy again.
No.
Yeah. And I'm sure he's still living there.
Yeah.
His sons are there running the store, doing the same kind of things. Did you have any other experiences? I know you traveled, I don't know if you went to the West Bank, but I know you went into Palestine. I know you went to Ramallah and Jericho. Any stories about your experiences there?
Yeah. So going to Jericho is actually one of my favorite stories because, I'm a Christian, and you read, the man that needs help on the road to Jericho. And so, when I'm going to Jericho, I'm thinking about that story in my mind. Well, to get to Jericho, you cross the border into Palestine, and you're in Ramallah, and you have to take a van to get to Jericho. And the van doesn't leave until it fills up. So unless you're with a tour group, you might have to sit there and wait a little bit for this van to pull up because Jericho's, it's so remote. It takes quite a while to get there. And so one of my friends from Germany and we were there. And we get there, we're the first people to get there. And so the bus driver says, we'll have to wait until other people arrive to be able to take you to Jericho. And so we're like, okay. And, as being a German and an American, we're very timely. And we're like, do you have an estimate on how long this is going to take? Is there a schedule? And he's like, oh, no, we'll just leave when people come. And we're like, okay. And so we just sit down, and we're, happy to wait. And it's probably 9 o'clock in the morning at this point. And our van driver, who's parked alongside all these other van drivers, he comes over and he says, would you please follow me? And so my friend Noah and I were like, okay, we'll follow this man, but we hope we're in an okay situation. And so we follow him around into this alley behind the bus stop, and he's back there with all these other bus drivers, and they've all brought their breakfast. They packed it from home, and they're all sitting back there having breakfast. And he said, we want you to join us for breakfast. And so Noah and I, of course, being the Americans we're like, oh, no, thank you, but it's okay. And he insists. And so we sit down. And out of all these bus drivers, he's the only one that speaks English. So we're not able to communicate with the other bus drivers. but you can communicate without words. And they were holding out parts of their breakfast to us. And we're so happy and smiling and doing gestures and all the things, since they couldn't speak English and obviously we couldn't speak their language. And I sat there and I was like, I'm sitting behind a bus stop in an alley having breakfast with 10 Arab men. Again, stereotype would tell me this is a very unsafe situation and I should not be here. But reality, it was a great experience. And I realized, just like the man on the road to Jericho, no one will stop and help him until the Good Samaritan comes along. And that was breaking down stereotypes. And so I was like, oh my gosh, how crazy is it that I'm having this experience on my way to Jericho? But that was just another one of those things where it was just like, it broke down every stereotype that I had. And it made me realize these are men, they're going to get off work and they're going to go home to their families the same way any person in any other country is going to want to do. And it just really convicted my heart for the stereotypes that I had always held, and made me realize, again, most people are good.
You heard beautiful music when you were a child, and you said you experienced beauty for the first time. Maybe you experienced beauty in a different kind of way, in a depth you had never experienced. Here you are in an alley with some bus drivers headed to Jericho, and you experienced a different kind of beauty. I wonder if that's not a theme of your life, that you've been privileged and you've also exposed yourself to opportunities to be stretched, which that in and of itself is a privilege you have chosen. It's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
You have worked as an intern for a U.S. congressman. You've worked as an intern for the International Rescue Committee. So you have a perspective about life. In this time, in this particular era we find ourselves in American history, I wonder if we're not living in the tension of what used to be and what is to come.
Absolutely.
If you had an opportunity to talk to a massive audience, I'm talking like the entire country, based on these perspectives that you're sharing, based on your time just looking at what a congressman does or what the International Rescue Committee does, or these perspectives you've shared about beauty in an alleyway in Palestine, what would you say to America? What does America need? Maybe bring it home to Abilene. What do we need?
Yeah, I think there's two things that I would say, and I think this transcends from wherever you are in the world, but also to Abilene too, is just kindness and humility is something that our world needs so much more of. And I think that kindness transcends any language, any lifestyle, any background. You can feel it. It permeates the atmosphere. And I think that's something that so many people have inside of them and they want to share. And you're getting to experience it on the interpersonal level. But I think our world needs more of that on a public level. Just understanding for people and the humility to know, hey, maybe I've had stereotypes about my neighbor. Maybe I've had stereotypes about what I'm watching on the news. But when you lead with humility, you can say, hey, maybe I need to take a step back from that and really look at my own heart and how can I lead with kindness out of that. And I think that's just something that our world needs more of.
It's almost a bit of a puzzle, isn't it? That kindness and humility could be passed off as a Pollyanna way to view things.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it is kindness and humility that drives the hearts of men all around the world, men and women. I mean,
Yes,
humanity,
yeah, absolutely.
humanity around the world.
Yeah.
So you have a rich set of experiences. Let's talk a little bit about Abilene and our city.
Yeah.
What do you like most about Abilene? Because you've lived here a while.
Yeah, the people. Absolutely the people. When I chose to come back to Abilene 3 years ago, I made the move straight from Jerusalem. And I was on a very different life trajectory right before I moved back to Abilene. My goal had always been to live in New York and to work overseas. And when I was living in Jerusalem, I wanted to come back to the States. I got my dream job offer in New York. And I sat down on my bed one night after I got that offer. And I never felt emptiness like that before. I just felt so empty on the inside. And I was so confused because I was like, I've worked so hard for this my whole life. And now it's finally happening. Why do I still feel so empty? And I realized it's because I was putting everything I had into what I did, not who I was. And all of the things I learned in Israel on the interpersonal level had really convicted my heart of like, I need to focus on who I am, not just what I do. You know, I think in our world, when you meet somebody, what's the first thing they ask you? What do you do? And so it's just something that we're trained, you know, that's the most important thing. And so I realized this emptiness I don't think is ever going to go away if I stay on this path. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to get off this path and I'm going to do something I never thought I was going to do. And I'm going to go back to Texas, and I wanted to come back to Abilene. It's always felt like home. And I wanted to, you know, make my niece and nephew's basketball games and baseball games and all the things. And so I chose to come back. And I really didn't know what that was going to look like, because obviously it was very different than everything I had worked towards. But once I came back, I've never looked back since then. And it's been the best experience, because as soon as I got back here, everyone was so welcoming. And I love it in Abilene because there's always places to get plugged in, but there's also people that want to help you build connections and get plugged in. You know, I lived in Abilene maybe a couple months. You meet a few people, and then those people are like, oh, let me introduce you to so-and-so. Let me introduce you to so-and-so. And it's this chain reaction. And so I just love that Abilene is so welcoming and it's so friendly, and they're excited when young people move back and they want to help them get involved in the community. And I think, you know, if you see in people, Abilenians have the biggest hearts, and it's just a great place to be. So I'm so thankful that I moved back.
I'm glad you talked about young people and
Yeah.
coming back to Abilene, and Abilene's message to young people who might consider coming here or coming back home. You've taught at Cisco College. You've taught marketing, if memory serves me right. And if you had a message to the 18, 19, 20-year-olds who are thinking about getting out of Abilene as fast as they can, what would you say to them?
You know, I am a big advocate for people coming back to Abilene or even staying in the get-go. I think, you know, sometimes you need to leave to realize how wonderful it is. And so a lot of times I would have my students tell me, oh, I want to go somewhere else. And I was like, that's okay. Like, you can totally do that. I did that. And then I came back. I think Abilene has a way of bringing things full circle and you coming back. But I think I would just tell young people, you don't have to sacrifice to live here. I think that's something that we have in our minds, a preconceived notion, especially if you've attended school here, is that, oh, in order to do big and great things, I have to leave. If not, I'm going to sacrifice being able to do big and great things and make a difference. And the one thing that I have learned since being back in Abilene, and even before I came back, I'm like, you can do great things anywhere you are. And I love it because greatness looks so different for each person. Greatness can be going and knocking on your elderly neighbor's door and taking them some cookies, or greatness can be starting a nonprofit, or anything that you have in your mind, but there's a place for that in Abilene. And I think Abilene is so receptive to growth, which is what I love about it. And so I would just always tell my students, you don't have to sacrifice to be here. You get to choose to be here, and I think that's the greatest choice that you can make.
Wonderful. And you work downtown, and you have the Philharmonic events downtown.
Yes. Yeah.
There's been a lot of construction downtown, the addition of the new hotel, and there's future plans for Abilene. You may be privy to that the rest of us aren't, maybe not, but what do you think the future of downtown Abilene looks like?
Oh, I think it's going to be vibrant. Just from, you know, I was born in Abilene, grew up in Throckmorton. We had to come to Abilene for everything. And so Abilene has always kind of been a home base for me through my whole life. And, you know, Abilene downtown used to kind of be a place you didn't really want to be because it had kind of fallen into disrepair. And then when I was at ACU, the revitalization project kind of started downtown. And then every time I would come visit downtown, you know, Abilene after I moved away, I was always amazed at how much growth there was. And I think it's just going to continue. Of course, we're ready for the construction to be over, but it's going to be wonderful once it is. And I think downtown Abilene is going to continue being a hub, especially as young professionals continue to move back. But I love downtown because there's a place for everyone. No matter what age you are, there's something to do. And I think that's just going to continue, which I think is going to help attract our young professionals to want to come back to Abilene.
Well, speaking of things to do, one of the things to do on a regular basis is attend a Philharmonic event at the Convention Center.
Yes.
So you announced late in the year 2024 your season, and you're coming up on a Valentine event.
Yes.
What does the rest of the season look like for the Philharmonic?
Yeah, so we are halfway through this season. It's been going so well so far. So in February, we have our Be My Broadway Valentine event. It's a pops concert, which is really appealing to audiences on all different levels. And then coming up in March, we have a concert called East Meets West. It's going to be a classical concert. And then in April, I'm personally excited about this one. And we're going to do a tribute to Whitney Houston. It's called To Whitney with Love. And we're going to have a vocalist coming in that will be singing all of Whitney Houston's greatest hits. So that's going to be something that's appealing to the whole family, really. And then we'll end our season with Pops at the Zoo, which is our family-friendly concert that takes place at the Abilene Zoo in May.
And that's a lot of fun when the Pops at the Zoo event happens, because this won't be the first time, right? That's been going on.
It's been going on. It was born during COVID because we needed to have a space where people could come and be able to maintain their safety. And then people loved it so much of being able to get to bring their kids and have fun at the zoo, because it's wonderful in and of itself. And so people loved it so much, we just listened and decided, let's make this a regular thing. And so we've just kept going.
And so if somebody were watching this interview and they said, that sounds intriguing. I've never been to a classical concert. I've never been to a Philharmonic. I don't know. How could you persuade them? What would you say?
Oh, I think if you've never been before, it'll be an experience that you can't get anywhere else. I think going to the symphony is a life-changing event, and maybe I'm a little bit biased because I felt like as a child it was a very pivotal thing for me. But it's so enjoyable, and I feel like until you hear the full 70-piece orchestra and just the emotions that come with that. Our musicians are classically trained. Many of them also play in the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, the Austin Symphony Orchestra. And so it's wonderful because you don't have to leave Abilene to experience a completely professional symphony orchestra, which is amazing for a community of our size to have that. And I think it's one of Abilene's greatest gems. And you really just have to experience it for yourself. And then we have found that once someone comes once, if we can just get them through the door, then they're hooked. And then they want to bring their friends and tell them as well, just because it's an experience really like none other.
And they say, well, I just experienced beauty for the first time.
In a different way, yeah.
And your conductor, Maestro David Icken, has been with you for...
This is his 20th season. Yeah, which is amazing. He's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot of ground, and I want to come back to some of the same themes, but I want to talk specifically about Abilene and your personal dreams for Abilene. If you could paint a picture of Abilene 10 and 20 years from now, what would be in that painting?
I think, just continuing to build a vibrant downtown. I think the downtown really serves as the hub for any city, and it sets the tone for the city. And so I think that's very important. For me, I would love it if we were able to bring in more outside businesses, that larger businesses that from across Texas that would be able to come in. So that way we would have a growing job market for our young professionals. So that way they're not having to think about sacrificing a great job in Dallas or Austin to come to Abilene. But no, you have the same opportunities here, but you still get the wonderful charm of living in Abilene. And so that's really what I would love to see happen, just to continue to grow. And young professionals, especially from our major universities here in Abilene, that they would be able to come back to Abilene like many have already done, and that there would be a continuing, growing job market for them to be able to do so. I love Abilene too because it really fits you in all seasons of life. We have our young college students here. We have so many families, they're starting a family here. And then Abilene is such a retirement community as well. So it's the blending of all of those life stages. And I love it because for me, when I moved back to Abilene, I don't just have friends that are in my same age demographic. I have friends that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. They invite me over to their house for afternoon coffee. And I love it because you get to hear the life stories and you get to hear of their dreams for Abilene too, and how it's blending into the future of where we're going with it. And so for me, I just love it, and I hope that continues. I hope the hospitality aspect of Abilene continues. So I think you can grow while also maintaining your character and the core of who you are as a community. And so for me, that's really my heart for Abilene, is that we would be able to continue to grow but not lose who we are at the same time.
And I want to come back as we conclude to that idea of kindness, humility, growing about who we are. But of course, Abilene certainly has its share of challenges too. And how are we going to move forward with the diversity that we see changing in Abilene? And what are the keys, in your opinion, toward us not just getting along, but achieving everything you're talking about, everything the city planners would want us to dream about? How do we do that with an ever-growing diverse community here in our city?
I think it all starts with a conversation. I think understanding one another, you have to have that base level of understanding before you can move forward. And before you can really execute that shared vision, you have to really understand one another. And I think that that's something that's so important, that we don't lose sight of the fact that we can all be different, but we can all have similarities at the same time. I think people don't realize how similar they actually are until they sit down and have a conversation about it. And I think a lot of things in Abilene, in the world at large, would change if you would just go to coffee with your neighbor. I think, if you just have a conversation, you realize, and you lead with kindness and humility, and that you realize we have a lot of similarities in life. We have differences, there's struggles. We're not perfect. Abilene's not perfect. The world is a very imperfect place. But I think for us to be able to grow while also maintaining our diversity, it just starts with a conversation. And I think that conversation starts with us. I think it starts on an individual level that can spread all across Abilene. And I think it would make us a better place just having those conversations. And I think that not only will it help us with our shared vision, but it will also help us to be better neighbors with one another, and just continue to make our community a special place. So,
and this is where we'll conclude, because we want to come back to the Philharmonic. We want to come back to something beautiful. We want to come back to who you are and what you've done and your dreams. But it would be remiss, I think, if we didn't acknowledge that in Abilene there are 3 Christian universities and arguably more nonprofits than any city in the world, and arguably more churches than any city in the world. But everything you're talking about really isn't achieved at the institutional level. Everything you're talking about, as you just said, is really individuals and making individual choices. And so I'm assuming you would say, and correct me, shape this however Liberty Grace Bland would shape it, but get out of your pew or get out of your house and get to know people and get to know your neighbor and serve as an individual. Does that resonate with everything you're saying?
It does, and I think it happens on every level. I think from an institutional level, we have to have a strategic vision of where we're going and how we're going to execute that. And so I think there is a level of critical thinking that comes with that. But I love it because it doesn't stop at your office. It doesn't stop at church. It doesn't stop at your volunteer organization. You can take that home with you. You can have that vision for what you want our community to be, but it doesn't stop at the office or the church. You are who you are, and you are what you do, and it's all encompassing, which I love, because at that point you get to go home and you get to have conversations with the people in your life about, what your vision is for Abilene. And so I think it takes us all, and I think it takes it from an institutional level, and also from a personal level at home as well. So I think it's something we're all working towards collectively, and we're doing that throughout every aspect of our life.
And I didn't expect for our conversation today, in this ongoing conversation called Abilene People, I didn't really expect it to, in a sense, become a miniature sermon. But in a sense, that's what you've done for us. You've preached an eloquent sermon. You've said, be kind, be humble, get to know people, serve people, get out of yourself, be open to change, be open to wider perspectives and deeper perspectives. That would be my summary of our conversation.
I love it.
But what would be yours?
I think you summed it up pretty well, honestly, right there. I'm with you on that, so thanks for summing that up. But I think everything that we talked about is applicable in every part of our lives. And I will say one thing, I think sometimes people say, well, if you're going to be kind and you're going to be humble, you won't achieve anything. You won't accomplish it. It'll get in the way of the goals. And I just don't believe that at all. I think that is an easy exit on it. I think that kindness and humility helps you in what you do. It helps you in your job. It helps you in your leadership qualities. And so for me, it impacts every area of your life, as it should. And so for anyone that has just listened to everything that we said and they say, oh, that's just a wonderful kumbaya aspect of things, I would challenge that. I don't think that that's the truth. And I think that you can be a kind and a humble person of character in every aspect of your life. And I genuinely think it helps you to lead a richer life on the inside, and also helps you in everything that you do.
Well, so beautifully said. Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Liberty Grace, for being our guest today on Abilene People. And you can come back to the Big Country homepage and watch future episodes, watch past episodes, and hear maybe not always a great sermon, but in this case, a beautiful sermon. And I want to thank our guest today, Liberty Grace Bland, Executive Director of the Abilene Philharmonic. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Danny.